Hey guys, welcome to the Renaissance English History Podcast YouTube channel. I am your host, Heather. I have been podcasting on Tudor England since 2009, which means my show is almost 15 years old. It's almost old enough to drive. This episode or this video is the first half of an author chat we did with Nathen Amin. Nathen Amin is a writer, author who's written several books on Henry Tudor, the House of Beaufort, Henry VII, and the Tudor Pretenders and Tudor Wales. He's an amazing historian. He was featured in the recent Channel 4 documentary on the new evidence around the Princes in the Tower. He was part of that show, and he's here to talk about his reading of the evidence and what he thinks about the Princes in the Tower. So this is actually the first half of the talk. I'm starting to do more of these author chats for members of the channel and also my Patreon supporters. But since you're watching here, it would be easier to just become a member here. If you want to be part of them live and listen to the full episodes and join in the chats in the future live, you can just click join here to join my channel. That'll get you access to extra episodes, all kinds of extra cool perks like that. My cat has come to say hello. This is Fred. Hey, Freddie. So thank you to Nathen Amin for coming to the channel. You should definitely buy his books. Check out his books, probably .co.uk. I'll put a link. I first found Nathen when I was planning the 2017 Tudor Summit. It's 6.5, almost 7 years ago now. And somebody said, "You've got to talk to this historian, Nathen Amin. He's got some new research out on the Beauforts." I was like, "Ooh, I want to know about that." And so I met him, and he's just such a lovely person. He's just such a lovely person. And yeah, and that Tudor Summit then turned into TudorCon. So Nathen Amin has been part of it from the start. One final super quick note. I do have about 100 copies of the Tudor Planner left sitting in my living room after we sent out the crowdfunding one. This is the 2024 Tudor Planner. If you want to Tudorify your 2024, this is what it looks like. That's Christine de Pizan on the back, who wrote the book, The City of Ladies, which advocated that women can be educated. Crazy idea. This is the weekly layout, has a habit tracker, lots of room for writing notes and things. It's the monthly layout. Anyway, you can see photos of everything, a video of everything, stickers at tudorfair.com, which is my shop, tudorfair.com. They make a great gift for you or the Tudor file in your life. Thanks so much for watching. Let's hop right over to Nathen Amin. Nathen, I'm so glad you're here. You have written some fantastic books specifically on the Pretenders, right? And you Tudor Wales, and the Beaufort family. Your books are fantastic, and you've been doing things with me and the Tudor Con and this whole world for a while. And I've watched you get huge and blow up, and it's just really exciting.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me. I think you probably were one of the first people to give me a platform, so I'm always going to come back to you. Don't worry.
So what do you think about this? What's your response? You were on the documentary. They didn't give you quite as much face time as I would have liked, but
They
what do you
didn't. There seems to be quite a bit of a misunderstanding, I think, amongst some people how documentaries seem to work. So I have tried to do some posts recently to try and give some detail. But I mean, we filmed for about 67 hours in total. I spent the entire day with the crew and with Rob. I mean, Rob in the UK, he's a celebrity, so that in itself is quite intimidating. He's my mother's favorite. My mother's got a bit of a crush on him.
Oh,
So
wow.
that was it was a very big day to meet him and be introduced to him. But you spend that much time with somebody, you very quickly build up a really close rapport. Especially when the majority of the day was just me and him walking and talking, not off camera, just for like back in shots and so on. And you're talking to each other, so that on camera it looks like you're engaged in historical debate, but really you're just talking to each other as how are you? How are you doing? How's your family and things like that. So we built up a really good rapport. And we did film for about 6 hours based on everything to do with this case. Now I did end up with just the 1 minute and 30 seconds in the documentary. The director did mention that, a lot of what I'd said had been pulled. That simply is, I mean, it's going to be for two reasons, and it's not really, it's not any nefarious reasons. It's just that a lot of what I said would have unpicked the narrative the documentary's trying to go to. And
Right.
secondly, there just isn't enough time to put everyone in. I mean, you always film hours worth of material on these documentaries for hopefully a minute even. Sometimes you don't even get in the documentary. So I've got no issues with
Okay.
what happened. Yeah. It wasn't my documentary. It wasn't my narrative to tell. Um,
Right.
but there we go.
All right. So we got that out. What did you think about it? What did you tell me? Give me your spiel now.
Well, I mean, first and foremost, we have to admit that whatever one thinks of Philippa Langley, and a lot of people do have strong opinions of Philippa, um, she's got her pursuit to exonerate Richard III, which she passionately follows. You cannot ignore her. Philippa is a big name and a big person in this world. Um, I personally think that she has commendable focus, and she's definitely leaving behind a legacy that most of us would love. I mean, on a personal note, I really enjoy her company. I think that's quite important to get across. I also think, and not many people, not many mainstream historians will agree with me here, and they certainly haven't this week, is I think it's important that the study of Richard III and perhaps the revisionist angle, which, I'm on record I don't really agree with. I don't really agree with some of the findings, but I think it is important that they definitely do deserve perhaps a seat at the mainstream table. Shakespeare definitely Shakespeare might have been a monster, but Richard III definitely is not the monster that Shakespeare has written him out to be. Thomas More has a hugely flawed account of him. I don't think it's a problem that we now have the odd Ricardian leaning book podcast documentary available. It can't all just be the traditional narrative, of which I am one. So I think that's important. It's nice to have this documentary. A lot of people have criticized it, they destroyed it online and so on, but it wasn't that long ago that, in this country at least, the Lucy Worsley had a Princess in the Tower documentary that was very much following quite a flawed version of the traditional story.
Mhm.
So you're just now equaling up the narrative. So I think it's good that they've done this documentary. I think it's good that they've done this book, which I've nearly got to the end of. Do I agree with the conclusions? Do I agree with the findings? I mean, no surprise, but no, I don't. But it's not. I don't understand why it's a problem that we've got this theories and this version of history thrown into the mix.
Right.
Um, it's got to be expected from their point of view as well that this is going to be critiqued, and it has been critiqued quite harshly in many cases. I mean, I'll probably do a book review at some point, so I might throw my thoughts into the mix. But it's interesting. Anything Prince in the Tower that reaches this wide an audience is brilliant. I mean, in the UK, this documentary got viewed by 1.3 million people. It's
Amazing.
insane that we've got a documentary that's reached that wide an audience. Obviously, I don't think perhaps it's had the reactions the Ricardians would have liked,
Mhm.
but it's definitely done wonders for me and my history and my book sales. I've got to be pleased about that. So go on,
Yeah.
Philip.
Go on, Philippa. Yeah, I mean, definitely there's opinions, not all, but lots of opinions start out unpopular and we have those discussions and, a lot it's not necessarily all on this side. It's not necessarily all Richard III was not a monster and he did a lot of really good governance that we were finding out about now, thanks to people like her and Matt and then, all of that. So there you go. But let's just talk really quickly about what the traditional you're talking about this traditional view. For people who don't know the traditional view, the 30-second Richard killed the princes. That's like the quick.
Yeah, I mean, 1483, 9th of April, 1483, Edward IV dies. He leaves behind two children. Richard III takes custody of the children, and suddenly it is declared that the children were illegitimate. They've been deposed. Richard III takes the crown for himself. Some would say he usurped crown. Some would say he was offered the crown. The
Some
great
context.
division in this period. But then by the end of that summer, the princes are placed in the Tower of London and they have disappeared. Traditional narrative is that they were murdered at the behest of their uncle Richard. and buried beneath a stairway in the Tower of London. Now, that is the hardcore traditional story, and many of us veer off
Mhm.
from that basics. I mean, I don't think they were buried beneath a stairwell. I think they were killed, and I do think they were thrown in the Thames. Other people think they weren't killed at all, or perhaps they were killed by Henry VII, the Duke of Buckingham, the
Or
Cookie Monster,
Margaret
somebody
Beaufort
else.
gets thrown in there as
I,
well.
I I purposely did not mention her name. Um, but yeah, so that is the basic gist of the traditional narrative, and it's a very compelling argument. The boy's uncle has captured them, thrown them in the tower, and they've disappeared. I mean,
Yeah.
Occam's razor straight away is flashing there.
And at the time, people were wondering what happened to them, right? Like so if he knew what had happened to them, or if he knew that they were alive, one would think he would bring them out and say, "They're here, you can stop talking about what happened to them because they're right here."
Yeah, so it's very interesting. So, like, there's arguments from like a Ricardian viewpoint that Richard III did not display the boys because he had let them slip away abroad to live out their times or to come back as the pretenders. Traditionalists would say that the reason he didn't display the boys is because he'd killed them and therefore
Mhm.
he couldn't display them. Um, Going back to the Ricardian side, surely if you kill the previous king, the whole point is you display it to stop um any rebellions. Myself, I believe they were killed during the reign of Richard III, but I believe that they were thrown into the Thames. So obviously, if they're in the Thames, you can't take that back. You can't say, let's display the boys. The fact that Richard didn't display the boys is ultimately what caused him a lot of problems, and it is what caused his downfall. Henry VII, when he becomes king, he learns a valid lesson there. He does take Edward the Earl of Warwick into custody, but he keeps him. And when a rebellion kicks off later down the line, he's able to display Edward the Earl of Warwick to try and take a lot of the steam out of the rebellion. Um, I personally just think that Richard couldn't display the boys because they were at the bottom of the river somewhere.
Why do you think that?
I'll tell you why I think that's because I've watched so many mafia movies. It's the obvious thing to do. If you kill somebody, you don't hang on to the bodies. You don't bury them uh, in your back garden. You get rid of them. Now, the historical source that I have that suggests this is a Welsh chronicle was written about 50 years later. So already some people will be saying, well, 50 years later, that's not near contemporary. Hey, we take what we can get in this period. But this Welsh chronicle does account for that the boys were put into a chest. They were taken out to a part of the Thames estuary called the Black Deep, which is just where the river starts to meet the ocean. And they were thrown overboard. And nobody apart from the guy in charge of that chest knew what was in the um, what was the cargo taken. It just makes so much sense. I mean, again, look at the modern mafia. They're burying people in lakes in Nevada and so on. That is exactly what you're going to do, and it answers why nobody has ever produced any bodies. I know we have the urns. I find that theory completely discredited. I think it's so unlikely the bones in the urn are the boys. And I think if we ever do get DNA testing and science is able to actually do this testing, it's going to show very quickly that they're not the boys. But you're not burying them 10 feet deep in the Tower of London. It's quite an absurd, non realistic theory for me.
Interesting. Okay, so I mean, I know you have your stuff you want to talk about, but I want to also ask you about going through the different documents that they lay out in the documentary and what you think of them as sources. And it was my thing as I was watching it, I just kept thinking, well, yeah, maybe that is from the time period. Maybe it does refer to Richard the Duke of York. But of course, because he was pretending to be, he's not going to then sign it Perkin Warbeck. So the fact that it's signed Richard, like that doesn't tell me any like that's part of the conspiracy. So I don't know, like I wonder what your take is on all of these different like receipts and the four, I think there were four documents that they lay out, and we can start with like the receipt for the munition or the mercenaries to be given, and then, some of the other things later. But like, what kind of overall, what do you think about these things?
So, I mean, Dr. Helen Carr did a really good tweet last week where she said something like, one of the hardest jobs as a historian is to be aware of your own bias when
Mhm.
dealing with evidence. And the first person you need to critique is yourself. Now, obviously, that can be taken to, Philippa and the Richard Third Society, where they are obviously not perhaps dealing well with their own bias. They have gone into this wanting to find the evidence. They've gone into wanting to find answers. But on the other side, I'm a natural skeptic to this. So I'm also dealing with my bias. Anything they've presented, I don't want to believe it. Or somebody is skeptical. So we're having to deal with all of that first of all. I think the Missing Princess Project have said that they spent 7 years of this investigation doing intelligence gathering, and they have now proven that the sons of Edward the Fourth, the Prince in the Tower, have survived the reign of Richard III. That is a big, big, bold statement, and I don't think it does stand up to scrutiny, my own bias, etc., notwithstanding. So, I mean, yeah, you mentioned that document that's signed by Richard of York, Richard of England, first and foremost. So I think there were a couple of documents at play. Um, One, we've got what they call the Gelderland document. It's a witness statement that's presented to show as proof of life that Perkin Warbeck was in fact Richard of York, and that's because this is a 4-page document, um, basically a biography. It's detailing what happened to him, and there is some glaring issues with that. First of all, I mean, first of all, if you're telling a lie, if you are being an imposter, if you're telling a story, you are going to leave behind a paper trail and you are going to try and explain exactly why you are this person. If this is Perkin Warbeck and he's being asked by his auntie and his supporters in Burgundy to write down his life story, he's not going to sign it
Freaking
Richard of England, aka Perkin. He's going to stick to the story. Um, it's It's a difficult one because I think this document was rediscovered by a lady called Natalie Nyman. I've met Natalie. She's part of the Dutch research group, and she's a fantastic woman who has the utmost of my respect. I mean, she's one of the stars of this process. She's been working really hard to get and hold these documents. So the document itself is fantastic. It really is, and I was amazed to actually see it on on parchment on screen.
yeah.
But this isn't new information. The fact that there's a document given a biography of somebody in the name Richard of England, we already knew that because at the same time period, we have already the Dendermonde letter, which I've written about extensively in my book, which came out a couple of years ago. It's just a biography. Now, this new letter, the Gelderland document, is a little bit more detailed and it has a few more names, which is definitely interesting because now we can go down and try and look to find out who some of these people are involved in it. But at the end of the day, it still isn't proof of life that Richard of England, Richard of York was signing this letter. It's just that we know that somebody who wanted us to believe they were that person has signed that letter. I mean, the fact you have a letter that says Richard of England, which they're passing off as proof of life. In 1991, Diana Klein wrote a book literally called Richard of England with a signature on the front of the book. So again, it's not new information. It's definitely not proof of life. We have to question the story told anyway by Perkin Warbeck / Richard in the story. Why was he allowed to leave the Tower of London? Why would Richard III let his nephews leave the Tower of London? From a security perspective, that makes no sense because then he wouldn't be able to control the boys. He wouldn't be able to prevent them becoming a focus of rebellion or present them when accusations grew louder. You do what Henry VII did. You keep hold of them and chuck them in the tower until the end of their lives.
Mhm.
Um, it's fascinating, this new evidence that gives us the names involved, Lord Howard and Henry and Thomas Percy. But by the time this document is written in 1493, all are dead, conveniently, so they can't be questioned. Similar to the people involved in the famous a pre-contract story that says that their father was married uh, before he'd married their mother. All the people involved in that were conveniently dead. But more importantly for me, the story is that Perkin Warbeck slash Richard claims in this document that they were taken out of the Tower of London and sent to France to live. Now, why the hell would Richard III send two of his nephews to his enemy to live amongst his enemy when they were already plotting to send another pretender back named Henry Tudor? If the
Mhm.
French know that they have two Yorkish princes living amongst them, they wouldn't have sent Henry Tudor across the water to invade. They would have gone, well, let's just use the real princes. So I think that document, which is issued with the claim of it being decisive evidence, not
Mhm.
decisive at all. We just know somebody signed a letter called Richard of England, which you would.
Yeah.
Um,
So one thing that just came into my head, like a Ricardian might say, well, he'd already made them. God, I'm having a brain issue. Um, illegitimate. That's the word. He'd already made them illegitimate, so he didn't necessarily need to kill them. So that's why maybe he would let them go. How would you answer that?
very simply, when you're made illegitimate, it's just a piece of paper. It means nothing. It can be reversed by any parliament. During the 15th century, we had Henry IV,
Mm.
Edward IV, Henry VI, the second time around, and Henry VII all become kings while subject to a parliamentary attainder. They simply became kings and then reversed documents. And obviously, as shown, look how easy Henry VII ultimately reversed the prince's illegitimacy. That is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. They were, regardless of whether he made them illegitimate or not, they were always going to be a threat to Richard III. And it's one of the things I hate the most in this discussion is that they were not a threat because of this
Okay.
illegitimacy. It's nonsense.
Right. Elizabeth the First was illegitimate. Mary the First was illegitimate. Like,
There we go. Yeah, I mean, but I never say them because they were going past my time
right, right,
frame.
right,
But
right.
yeah, exactly. It doesn't matter. Basically.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. I just wanted to put that out there because I could imagine somebody saying that in their head. So, and then there was this receipt, that was another piece of evidence that was given, and that then leads into the coronation in Dublin, which I was really confused about because I thought Lambert Simnel was, pretending to be Edward the Sixth, and that's, like, why Henry brought him. I'm really, like, confused about that whole timeline. Because they seem to make it seem as if it was Edward the Prince, and I thought
Yeah.
it was Duke of Warwick or Earl of Warwick. So, yeah, can you set me straight on that?
I'll try to. Right. Okay. So first of all, let's look at this proof of life that has been discovered.
Mhm.
They're calling it the Lille receipt. It's basically it's an incredible find by a chap called Albert of the Dutch Research Group. Um, it's it's well, it's exactly what it's called. It's a receipt found in Lille, dated to I think December 1487. It's a payment for 400 pikes, to be provided for the invasion of Margaret of York's nephew. And in the receipt, that nephew is called the son of King Edward. Now, that would suggest it is Edward V, the missing prince in the tower. I believe this document is completely authentic. I believe, it's not a forgery or anything of the kind. Um, and it is hugely compelling. If you take this document by itself, you're going to go, well, that's surely proof of life that Edward V was living uh, 4 years after he disappeared. Uh, but, but, first of all, there's evidence during this time of pretenders, of claimants to the throne being misidentified to make them seem more important.
Mhm.
In 1484, Henry Tudor was in France and he was trying to become the King of England. The French wanted to make his claim look more important and better than it was. So they started calling him the son of Henry VI. Now, Henry Tudor was the nephew, the half nephew of Henry VI. And he had no blood claim through Henry VI. But the French wanted to call him a son of Henry VI because that would make the French give more money and more
Interesting.
military to them. But it's absurd. It's nonsense. And everybody knew Henry Tudor was not the son of Henry VI. So they very quickly dropped it. it was ridiculous. Could something similar have been happening here? There is clearly an imposter, or somebody in Burgundy at this time wanting to invade England, or his supporters are putting him forward to support England, invade England. Would it have been better for them to have called him Edward V, the son of King Edward, rather than one of his other nephews? So I think the little receipt is brilliant, it's compelling, but it can be explained away very simply. Now, the major reason it can be explained away is because of the context of this period. So, which brings us round to why you're confused about what's taking place in Dublin. So, the Lambert Simnel affair, the Lambert Simnel invasion, the traditional story, which I still think stands up, is that Henry VII has a legitimate Yorkish prince in the Tower, Edward the Earl of Warwick, a cousin of the princes in the Tower. Now, in 1486, there is a small rebellion against Henry VII, led by the Stafford brothers, and they are going around waving the Warwick family banner, and they're chanting Warwick, Warwick in the streets. But nobody joins them. Nobody's interested. They haven't got a leader. They haven't got a figurehead. Warwick's in the Tower of London. The rebellion fell apart. A couple of months later, 1487, there are now rumours that this conspiracy has started up again. There are people attacking some of Henry VII's men, servants, in the streets, shouting out the name Warwick, Warwick, Warwick. And now Henry VII hears that this conspiracy actually does have a boy at the head of it who's claiming to be the Earl of Warwick. So there's that, first of all. We have evidence during the time of how potent the Warwick name was. The conspiracy now leaves Oxford and it crosses over to Ireland, and Dublin specifically. Why Dublin? Well, the Earl of Warwick's father, the Duke of Clarence, that idiot allegedly got drowned in some wine, he was born in Dublin. So when a rebellion, a conspiracy turns up in Dublin and they say to the Irish, we have the son of your Clarence. He is the real claimant to the English throne. The Irish very quickly go, we're all in. We're going to crown him. Of course, we love Warwick. We love Clarence. We're going to take down the English king. Go back to London. Henry VII parades the real Warwick around London. He goes around to all of his men. He takes him to St. Paul's Cathedral. He goes, behold, this is Warwick. So the conspiracy falls apart in England straight away, but it doesn't in Ireland. So a few things at play here. Why the hell is Henry VII parading the real Warwick if we're now supposed to believe that this imposter boy was not pretending to be Edward of Warwick, he actually was Edward V? That doesn't make any sense, because why parade Warwick? Why do we have English sources at the time and Flemish sources abroad all saying that this conspiracy was in the name of a son of Clarence? Why do we have no other evidence whatsoever apart from this receipt to show that this conspiracy was in the name of Edward V, not Edward of Warwick? And finally, we are asked, why would the Irish crown a boy in Ireland, which is surely a great crime against their religion, to crown an imposter? Well, not if they genuinely believe that they did have a real prince amongst them. You know, of course, they would do everything by the religious rituals of the day. There's too much context around this time that this was all a conspiracy in favour of Edward of Warwick and not Edward V. The
Right.
receipt that muddy the waters a little bit, and it does give this theory more legs, but it's definitely not proof of life. It's definitely not compelling, decisive evidence that settles the case. Nowhere near.
Yeah. Also, like, could it have been a typo? Like, that's it. Like, I'm thinking who wrote this? Like, it's an accountant, it's a person in accounts. Maybe they were just like, I could imagine them sitting there at their desk with their pen or their scroll, obviously, and like being told, okay, write this receipt out for this and it's for this. And okay, I'll write a receipt, and like not even necessarily knowing. Like, is that a thing that could have happened?
Yeah, I don't see why. I mean, very famously, Margaret Beaufort, when recording the dates of birth of one of her grandchildren, the future Henry VIII, the certain Henry VIII, in her Book of Hours, she got the year date wrong. I mean, these people get things wrong and they don't have Tipp-Ex, they don't have erasers. It's a lot more difficult for them to erase it. It could just be a misunderstanding. It could be what I said earlier, that they were actually trying to bolster the imposter's claim by saying he was
Mhm,
Edward V. We simply don't know, which means it's not proof of life. It means it's not decisive if all of these things can be explained away. I think for this theory, it takes a lot of faith to believe that Edward V survived 1483. He existed for a couple of years abroad. He managed to go to Ireland in 1487. He invaded England, roughly around 16 years old at this point. And then we're asked to believe that he fought at the Battle of Stokefield in 1487 against Henry Tudor's army. And one of two things seem to have happened, according to the theory. One, he was killed and then replaced with a little imposter boy who is taken to London, and we're told this is Lambert Simnel, go and work in the royal kitchens. Or who was allowed to live out his days in Somerset as a chap called John Evans, which is one of the other latest theories of a survivor. I mean, you're asking us to believe a lot there. Doesn't mean it couldn't potentially have happened, but surely the most obvious thing that happened is the traditional story, which is there was an imposter boy created by a little cabal to pretend to be the Earl of Warwick, who was in the Tower of London and was the real Yorkist heir at the time.
I know we're at half past, and I wanna be mindful. I said this would take about half an hour, so I wanna be mindful of your time. Um, I just wonder, can you tell me why do you and then I also want you to plug your books, but can you tell me why you think people have so like, why this moves people so much, so long after? The amount of emotion that people have invested in this, why do you think that is?
Nobody wants to believe that children were murdered.
Mhm.
Obviously, the whole Richard III thing is very emotive. First and foremost, I think that Richard III, cardinism, etc., has been driven mainly by people being attracted to an underdog of history,
Yeah.
which is ironic because the real Richard III was anything but an underdog during the time. But people have their interest in Richard III for their own reasons, and obviously it extends to the s the case of the Princes in the Tower. It's a whodunit. It's a murder mystery. It's the greatest
Mhm.
mystery we have. It's up there with, Jack the Ripper, possibly JFK, depending if there's any documents relating to that that have yet to be released. Um, it's a royal conspiracy whodunit. That is always gonna involving children. It's always going to move people. It's always gonna, um attract people with their theories. I mean, in modern times in Britain, we did have the disappearance of a little girl called Madeleine McCann. And to this day, we don't know what happened to her. And there's still, there's a lot of theories and a lot of research and a lot of fake sightings and false sightings regarding the little girl. We don't know simply what happened to her. It's a bit of a cold case itself. This is just adding all of the elements of history, emotion, and it's never going to be solved, regardless what we want to call this latest revelation. Is this case solved? It's not ever going to be solved, which is only going to ever fuel the discussion. It's why we're here talking about it now.
Yeah, 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 for sure, for sure. Okay, so you have a really great book on the Tudor Pretenders. That's like a really good. I mean, all of your books are great, but where else can people read your books? Tell me, plug your books. Books.
Plug my books. Okay, so currently, yeah, I think Henry VII and the Tudor Pretenders is the book that's at the moment getting a bit of the attention. Um, I do know it's on for the American listeners. It's on the Barnes and Noble website, so I think it can be delivered within America.
And it's on
It
Amazon.
and it's on Amazon, and it's on bookshop.org, and places like that. It does seem to be a bit of a stock issue at the moment. So
At
if you look
you.
at Amazon and it's not there, please don't give up. Please do go to an alternative website and continue your pursuit of my um what did you call it? Wonderful book.
Oh,
And yeah, and like I said, my book has caught a lot of interest at the moment because my job in that book is not to tell you if Warbeck and Simnel are real or not. I have my own opinions and I put across the case. Um, but it's not my job to really tell you who they were in this book. It's to tell you what happened. It is a tale from 1483 to the end of Henry VII's life. It features invasions, conspiracies, murder, heartbreak. It's got everything because a hell of a lot of things happened during that 20-year period. And it's just a fascinating story. I mean, there were invasions, there were battles. It features the whole Margaret of York and Warbeck over in Austria trying to get the support of um of Maximilian and so on. And I think I'm trying to pitch it at the moment as being if you should definitely read Philip Langley's book. I'm a huge proponent of doing that. I think it's an admirable read. I mean, I'm definitely impressed by how methodical it is and the chronological layering out of sources. As a as a as a study guide, her book is um it's invaluable. But also, to understand your own argument, you have to read widely and
sure.
scrutinize accounts that hold opposing views. So I am saying at the moment, by all means, everyone should read Philippa Langley's book. You should also read my book.
Mhm.
If you are anti-Ricardian, read Philippa Langley's book. If you are anti the traditional narrative, read my book. Read them both. They're going to complement each other greatly. And for that matter, Matthew Lewis's Survival of the Princess in the Tower,
Yeah.
or in fact, all of the books of the Princess in the Tower. You've got to read them all. You can't just read one book and think that's done. Read widely, confront your bias, expand your knowledge, and hopefully, I'll make some money to feed my cats.
There you go. Man, I love it. People getting educated and your cat's being fed. Like, you can't argue with that. They need the fancy food too. They need the good stuff, not Sainsbury's brand.
Yeah.
You gotta give them the fancy Marks& and Spencer stuff. Or
But over here, they're called Dreamies. I think somebody said in
oh,
America they're called Temptations, maybe. But
Temptations. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you got it. The cats need some dreamies. All right, we had one chat here by Mary. Hi, Mary. She said, "Nathan, I read both of your books. They were great. Any new book in the future?"
Yeah, I finished my next book, which at the moment might be my last book. I'm in a semi-retirement at the moment because I've run out of things to write about. It's called The Son of Prophecy: The Rise of Henry Tudor. It will again cover the Princess in the Tower. It's basically a 300-year epic covering the Welsh Tudor family's rise from North Wales, from being Welsh rebels to English kings. If you like my House of Beaufort book, it's same deal, but the other side of the family tree. And I think it's good. Uh, it's
Awesome.
it's covering, Owen Tudor, the Welshman who got a queen, Jasper Tudor, hero of the Wars of the Roses, Henry Tudor's time in France, in exile, and how the hell did he become King of England? So, yeah, I think it's going to be a good one. And in theory, all three of my books will then end up as being a bit of an unofficial trilogy. Um, I've got the Beaufort family, I've got the Welsh Tudors, and then I've got Henry VII's reign in the middle. So I'm looking forward to that. Next July, that'll be out.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Well, I hope it's not your last. Um,
I,
I
I, I,
think
I need ideas. And I don't know what I've got at the
you
moment.
know what I wish you would write about? Well, I wish somebody would write about this, but because you're an expert in Wales, like, I love those books, like, by that Edward Rutherford writes those biographies of places where he'll
Yeah.
just, like, be in one place. Like, he has, like, one on the New Forest, and I think you should write one of those on, like, some area in Wales because I devour those things.
The problem with Wales is that we might have one major event happen, and then nothing else happens for hundreds of years.
Well, that's okay. That book on the New Forest, I just finished well, I didn't read it recently. I don't know, it skipped 600 years at one place, so, anyway, you just
Yeah,
maybe some
maybe.
historical fiction could be in your future.
Yeah, maybe. I've penned a couple of paragraphs in the last couple of weeks of a fiction book. Like I've got a really great idea, but fiction is a whole different thing, and I can see the idea in my head. It's just having the talent to even or the planning to mm, try and make it unfold a little bit. But who
Uh,
knows? I, I,
uh,
I I'll get bored eventually,
okay.
So
And the
and then
cat need more dreamies.
I'll get bored eventually, and then I'll have to start writing because there's only so much. I'm in my reading phase at the moment.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. All right. Well, Nathan, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you to Dina and Mary for showing up and buy Nathan's books. That's all I can say. So thank you.
Thank you very much,
Yeah.
everybody.
All right. I appreciate you so much. We'll talk soon. Have a good
Thank
holiday
you.
season. Bye.